Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a piece I recently completed called Painting in Purple for You, or How to Draw Prince in Procreate 5. So this is a caricature, of the artist formerly known as Prince, or the Kid, or any of a numerous amount of nicknames, including the purple one, that have been assigned to him over the years. But for right now and for our purposes, I think we're just going to settle on the name Prince just to make things a little bit easier. We're going to take a little bit of time today talking about the development method of this particular piece. And this actually had a little bit of inspiration from another channel that exists on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description down there. And it's just a channel that gives word prompts every single week to give you some inspiration to draw, and do some submissions to a group that can kind of come back, give you some critique, feedback, or just hopefully build you a little bit of an audience. And this is a really kind of fun little project with the musical prompt being musicians or bands. I'm a huge fan of music. I've been playing guitar for roughly about 10 years or so, and so it came pretty clear to me that if I was going to do something musically inclined, I was going to choose a couple of my favorite artists, Prince being one of them. Tom Petty is another one that I did recently, and I believe I got some videos ready to publish on that in the near future. But as far as Prince is concerned, one of the things I really wanted to kind of focus on was not only getting the caricature of his face right, but also deciding which version of Prince that I wanted to represent here. Because, a little while ago I did a painting and published it of Madonna, and I struggled with this idea of which version of Madonna to do. What do you do? Vogue Madonna, like a Virgin Madonna, Express Yourself Madonna. She's gone through various reinventions over the years, and Prince, not quite as much as she has, but he certainly had some evolution over time. And so when I think of Prince, and when I imagine Prince, there are two main phases that kind of come to mind for me. There's the Purple Rain phase, and then a little bit later, I believe maybe in the mid-90s or so, the Diamonds and Pearls phase. And he did look a little bit different, mostly in regards to how he dressed and the guitars that he was playing. And so what I tried to kind of do here is get some sort of a combination of the two, to kind of create my own version that's kind of an amalgamation of all the Princes that are out there. So the outfit is very much reminiscent of the Purple Rain era. The hair, kind of a combination of several different hairstyles he wore over the years. And the guitar comes from that period of time where he had changed his name to the artist formerly known as Prince. And so the guitar was meant to evoke that symbol that he changed his name to. Again, I mentioned this before, I've played guitar for a number of years, so one of the things that was a really important factor to me in getting this down was making sure that I really got the drawing of the guitar as accurately as I possibly could. And this goes back to something I've mentioned over and over and over again, reference. It was really important I have reference and get a good idea as to how this thing was being drawn. So you can see that immediately what I'm doing is getting in here and drawing in some guidelines to make sure I try to nail the perspective that I wanted to get there. I'd done a rough drawing before, and the guitar didn't really look like it was sitting up against his body, so I came back, redraw it with some guidelines to try to make sure that I got it as form-fitting to the figure behind it as I possibly could. Once I had the kind of layout put in there, the next thing is to kind of get a more thorough drawing kind of put in here to kind of put all the elements together and then work on the composition. This is pretty typical of my method. One of the things I will mention, though, just in regards to the caricature, is that I had a lot of fun drawing it. I knew from the get-go Prince was going to be, relatively easy to draw because he has some very distinguishing characteristics. His eyes are heavily made up with mascara, so that was going to be very, very thick outlines there. His eyebrows are very, kind of trimmed and plucked and pointed, so that was, fairly easy thing to kind of exaggerate. He has very high, very distinguished cheekbones. So that kind of comes through a little bit less in the line, but more in the coloring aspect. And then he has, the very pronounced lips with the kind of almost dimple chin. So these were the kind of the areas I focused on, along with the curly hair, to really kind of sell the look. But as I was drawing it and redrawing it and tweaking some of the curves and the lines there a little bit, it started to kind of, mess with my head a little bit. And if you've ever drawn caricatures before, one of the things that I think that a lot of people kind of strive for when they do caricature drawing and striving for that likeness is to try to get it down as quickly as you possibly can. I kind of generally believe in this school of thought that a caricature should be done in maybe about like maybe 10-15 minutes or less. I know this seems like aggressive, but this is kind of, again, my working method. And one of the things that I found in my working method is that if I spend too long trying to capture likeness, I will start to lose the likeness, or I'll be staring at it so long, I second guess whether or not I've achieved that likeness. And for a long period of time here, I'm staring at this thing, wondering whether or not I was actually drawing Prince, or if I was drawing Lionel Ritchie. For some reason, I kept seeing Lionel Ritchie in this from staring at it for so long. So the point of the matter here is that, I want to make sure that I take my time and get a really good rendering of this done. But if I stare at it for too long, I'm going to start betraying what is ultimately going to be something striving for resemblance. So periodically, I had to walk away from it, get into a different reference photograph and things like that, and even at some point or another start doing some experimentation where I took elements of the face and just moved them around a little bit to see if that would help me kind of find that resemblance again. So at some point I kind of selected just the nose and moved it around the face a little bit, maybe closer to the eyes, maybe closer to the mouth, to see really what kind of sold that resemblance and got it away from Lionel Ritchie and more into Prince. And I think one of the problems here is I think that the mustache and the mouth are so similar to Lionel Ritchie that's where I kind of struggled and need to kind of tweak that until I got it just right. The eyes, as I said before, were relatively easy because it was really just more of a matter of really kind of getting really dark, big, bold, thick lines and even some eyelashes. And if I speak to my style a little bit, I usually save the pronounced eyelashes for women and don't really do that so much for men. But because he's somebody that just wore a lot of mascara and eye makeup in a lot of the photographs that I saw of him, it just seemed necessary to kind of do it in that style and in that manner. Hands. I will say this, that one of the little tricks I tend to pull off from time to time, I don't do it all the time, but occasionally I will do this, and this figure is a great example of the method. Arms can be a little bit difficult to draw sometimes, especially forearms when you're trying to do things like foreshorten and things like that. So one of the tricks I've kind of come up with, through a certain amount of experimentation, is to start by drawing the hands. So once I have an idea where I want the body and the head to be, before I really kind of commit to where the arms are or how I'm going to kind of draw that foreshortening on the forearm, I start just by drawing the hands first. And then what it essentially becomes is almost like a kind of a game you play where you know where your shoulder is and you know where your hand is, and you're basically just playing connect the dots at that point to get the arm laid in the way that you want it to. So sometimes where I can't figure out like where I want the elbow to be or how the arm should bend, or again how to get that foreshortening done, just playing connect the dots with a hand and a shoulder sometimes kind of helps me get everything where it needs to be. And again, Prince was a great example of how I kind of feel like I kind of nailed it, mostly because of the fact that I had two very awkward arms to put in there to surround various areas of the guitar that I wanted to really kind of get, kind of sitting in with that figure. There's a lot of overlapping going on here between arms and forearms and guitar neck, so that little trick of that connect the dots method really kind of works effectively, I think. All right, so one of the other things that needed to be done was drawing in this guitar strap, and it was one of the last elements that I put in because at some point or another I had to kind of decide where exactly this guitar was going to be sitting. Was I going to move it down a little bit and change where the position of the hands are going to be? Was I going to have it sitting a little bit higher up on his body? And again, this is where you go back to the reference photographs. It seems that he tends to wear his guitar roughly around the waistline, so once I had that established, at that point the guitar strap could be drawn in. And then again, it's kind of like that connect the dot type mentality. The guitar strap has to connect to the guitar, but the other end has to kind of wrap around his shoulder, and so it became pretty easy to kind of figure out where it went from there. Final line work is being finished up right now, and in just a minute we're going to move into the coloring, and it's probably no surprise we're going to do a lot of focus on purple today. I'd like to start with the background, just kind of lay that in here really quick. And for this one, I kind of had this idea that Prince was kind of standing on a stage with a big old spotlight on him. But because of his love of purple, it was pretty clear which color I was going to choose for that. Now, I put the purple background in, and then I immediately hid it, so that way I could focus on the figure for a little while. And the reason I did this is because for a moment, I wasn't exactly committed to the purple background. I knew that his outfit was going to be purple, and I had some qualms, some fears here that everything was going to blend together. All the purples would just, mean a lack of contrast, so nothing would stand out from each other, and the whole thing would just kind of look muddy. So I decided to work with the purple, keep it in the background, but, not commit to it. Maybe I'd change it later to maybe like an orange or a yellow or something like that to create that contrast that might be necessary. And if you notice, I kind of want to flash in some oranges right here to kind of experiment with that briefly, and ultimately decided I didn't quite like it, and so I ended up going back to the purple background a little bit later. The purple thing is obviously, again, the main color on this, so in order to try to provide some sense of contrast, I had to kind of deal with purple in terms of color theory. So to break that down for just a second, color theory, at least to me, it really kind of exists in two fields: the warm colors and the cool colors. The warm colors being your reds and oranges, and your cool colors being your blues, and to a certain degree your greens, and etc. And the problem then becomes purple. Purple just kind of seems to sit in the middle somewhere. It is part red and warm, and then part blue and also cool. So when you're kind of putting this stuff in, like, how do you kind of create contrast between warm and cool, and how do you achieve that if everything's purple with some sort of a combination of the two? So what I decided to do here is to start with a purple, but be very distinct about which shades of purple I was using. For example, the coat is very heavy blue type of a purple, whereas the guitar is a little bit more heavy on the red side. And then for the pants, I just kind of went with something that matched up the coat, but then just kind of lowered, just kind of added white to it, or kind of lowered the hue a little bit, so that way I could get something that was distinctly different, although I didn't need as much contrast there. Remember, this is also going to be competing with a background that's also purple, so this distinct difference between the bluish purple and the reddish purple really kind of helps get that contrast that I'm looking for. Now, warm and cool colors are also something that comes into the shadow and the light work that you do as well. And I knew from the get-go, because of the way that I rendered the background, that I was going to be using a purple light. And then that becomes the question, well, is that a warm light or is it a cool light? So for this particular problem-solving experience, I decided to just kind of make a decision and stick to it so that we could keep everything consistent. So the purple that I chose for the background was something that kind of, again, twinged more to kind of like a bluish light, so cool light, and I decided then the shadows were going to have to be warm to offer some contrast. So when it comes time to do the shadows, I kind of follow a similar method doing my shadow over and over and over again, and that's to use some sort of a color that is desaturated and mostly gray. But again, making a decision between warm and cool. So it's very, very difficult to see, but up in the upper right-hand corner of the piece here, there is a pale, kind of almost pinkish red dot sitting there. And that is my color palette for my shadow. Now, when I do shadows, what I do is I take all these, mid-tone colors that I've already placed in, I put a layer over top of it, set it to multiply, and then I choose the shade or the color that I'm working with. In this case, again, is that kind of warm pinkish tone, but it's very, very desaturated, almost gray. And that is what I'm using to paint in my shadow. And the beauty of doing it this way is that I can paint it everywhere and the colors will match up, because multiplying is a blend mode that will pull colors from underneath and mix it with that kind of palish pink that I'm using to create a true shadow tone, just something that's a little bit warmer than the initial tone is being painted on top of. So for example, that warm pink tone has been painted all over the face to render its shadow, but that same exact tone was painted over the coat to create its purplish kind of shadow, and that same exact thing was also painted over the white of the shirt to create its almost grayish shadow as well. It also was used in the guitar, the hand, every other element, and it's the same shadow for everything. And a similar method is used for the light. So you see that there's kind of a purple, warmish, coolish light there that was used to render the light. And that's really all there is to it. It's just a little trick that I use so I don't have to go back and constantly be picking different colors to render different shadows. And I think you'll find it's a pretty effective method. Now, this was something of a more kind of simple cartoonish take on prints. So I didn't really do a lot of shadow and light rendering here and get it really, really complex. So you'll see that there aren't a lot of, taking the shadows and softening the edges or anything like that. I really just kind of went for big and bold on this one. And mostly because, I really wanted to kind of go for something of a simplistic look on this, because I wanted to really kind of get the guitar as accurate as I possibly could. So a couple details I'll point out because, I spent an enormous amount of time on it. But it is truly a standard electric guitar in the sense that it's 6 strings. You have your 6 kind of keys up at the top there, and he has 2 electric pickups in there as well. I just painted in the strings so you can kind of see where they lay, and I've also included the whammy bar and the volume dials for the 2 pickups there, so that way I could, again, get that as accurately as I possibly could. I'm not sure if you get the reference if you're watching this, but the guitar is meant to resemble the symbol that he turned his name into for a brief period of time, and I haven't been able to find anything to prove that this is absolutely true, but I heard that he changed his name to a symbol as a result of like a publishing dispute with his contract with Warner Brothers. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one. I kind of try to get to the point as quickly as I could on this, so if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and please don't forget to subscribe. I'll have some more content posted soon, and in the meantime, take care, and I hope I see you again soon. Thank you.